Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today, from beautiful blue-skied Alberta, we have Alison McBain, who writes in a plethora of genres. How are you doing today, Alison?
I'm doing wonderfully. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, well, we are delighted to have you. Thank you very much for joining us. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us, Alison. Yeah, you write in a lot of genres, but I think what is most of interest to us in discussing today is sort of the speed that you write in. We want to talk a bit about that. You had mentioned to me that you typically write a book in a week, which seems extremely fast. So we want to definitely dig into that. So why don't you start us off by telling us a bit about yourself and when you started writing, and if you've always been writing this fast or you've sort of come up with a technique for doing that.
Well, I definitely have not been writing this fast my whole life. This is sort of I like to describe it as a marathon. I've been training and training for years, and I finally achieved my goal, which was writing a book a week last year. But I started writing very, very young. My first story that I wrote, which no one read except for my family, of course, was when I was 4. But it still has a special place in my heart. And it was a horror story, of course, because, 4-year-olds love to talk about the monster under the bed. But since then, I've been writing my whole life, and it wasn't until about 10, 15 years ago that I was like, you know what, maybe I should send some of this stuff out. And it met with some success.
So were you self-published or did you send this out to publishers?
Both. So I not only write in all genres, I also write all formats. So I write everything from poetry to short stories, flash fiction, novels, novellas. So some of it I did send out to traditional publishers. Some of it I published myself. So I am open to all ways to get my stories to print.
Oh, no, Roland, you're on mute there. I see you talking.
Oh, I was just looking at your catalog, and yes, to use that word again, you have such a plethora of books. You have so many beautiful covers, and what inspires you to write each of the individual things? Sorry, I will stop interrupting before Craig, because I know you were going to talk about how to write a book quickly, but I was just going to say, you have so many different eclectic books. What inspires you to write one thing? If you're writing a book a week, do you get up on Monday and be like, I'm going to write a fantasy this week, and then the next Monday it's like, I'm going to write more of a sci-fi this week or something like that?
Well, for my shorter stuff, yes. I feel like there are stories all around us, like I can get inspired by seeing someone walking down the street, or, I do read a ton. So I read tons of nonfiction articles, especially science articles, politics, history. So, whatever takes my fancy, I might make a note of it, and that will later become a story or a book. So I find inspiration everywhere, and I read everything. I read all genres. So I write all genres, because a good story is a good story, no matter where it comes from.
Yeah, well, that's true. So when we're talking about writing a book a week, how long of a book are we talking about here?
I went by, because this is a project that I set up way in advance. I did a lot of preparation for it. I went by the sort of award classification. So a book has to be 40,000 words and above, which is, short for a published book. That's more like novella territory. Some of the books that I wrote were a bit longer, 55,000 words. But, even for me, there's only so much I can write in a week.
Okay, so that sort of gives us a bit of a hint about how you're doing it in the sense of the planning that goes into it. So you're not just like waking up on a Monday and like, okay, I'm just going to write a horror this week, and then you start, and by Friday it's done, right? You mentioned a lot of planning goes into it. So why don't you take us through that process?
Sure. I started out my writing career actually as a pantser, which is, for those who don't know, the writing by the seat of your pants, essentially. So, as you said, waking up on Monday and like, oh, I think I'm going to write a science fiction story today. But one part of my preparing for this marathon project was my actual career. So, I'm not only an author, I'm an editor and a ghostwriter. So a lot of times for my ghostwriting, I would have to write a whole bunch of words on a very short deadline. So that is some of what helped me prepare to say, hey, I can take on this project myself. But for the project itself, what I did ahead of time, and it was about 4 to 6 months ahead of time before I started, was I did chapter by chapter outlines of all my books. I did character sketches of all my books. Sometimes I even pulled, like if there was a way that I wanted to look, I would scroll around on the internet and find a picture of how I pictured the character looking. And so I'd have that picture in my files, and notes about them, so that I could, if I wanted to say, describe a character, I would do it the same way every time because I'd have that picture right in front of me.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes a lot more sense. You're planning out everything ahead of time so that when you get to the writing the book part, all the planning's done, all the chapter by chapter outlines, you've figured out all the characters. I mean, obviously things come up when you start writing, things tend to get away from you a little bit, but having that sort of a detailed plan makes it a lot more understandable, I think. I mean, it's still a lofty goal. If you're doing even a 40,000 word book in a week. Are you talking about a 7-day week?
A lot of times, yes. Once in a while, I would take a day off, but yeah, I was, butt in chair every every day. Yeah.
Still, even with a 7-day week, that's still 5,000 or 6,000 words a day, at the low end. So, which is still a lot more than most people write. I know a lot of authors. I mean, everybody's goals are and levels of speed that they can achieve are different. But I know, 1,000 or 2,000 words in a day is often what a lot of authors try to strive for. So this is, more than double that. I don't know, Roland, what were you, when you were writing more sort of regularly, how many words a day were you doing? I know you used to track that sort of thing.
It varied hugely. I would always aim for 2,000, which is what Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond books, aimed for every day. But I think I could consistently sort of put out 5,000. My best in 1 week, I've only written a book in a week once, but it was a 70,000 word book that I wrote in a week just because it fell into place. But that I found it very difficult to keep consistent at that pace. So I think like 2,000 words a day to 5,000 words a day is kind of a manageable daily thing if you've got the time. And I kind of enjoyed it because I get there in the early afternoon and I'd be like, okay, I'm good for the day now. And then you could just go on and do other things.
And then so when you did that, did you have it all planned out as well ahead of time?
I would normally, when I was doing the washing up, cooking the kids dinner, walking the dog or whatever, have it playing in my head and working out what was going to happen the following day in the section that I was going to write. And I always have like a broad idea of where the story's going, but it's like you put yourself into that scene and you imagine yourself as the character. And it's like, okay, how am I going to describe these things that I know are going to happen? And I think I probably spent as much time writing the book when I was just walking around and doing other stuff as I did actually typing it onto the page.
Is that sort of how you work as well? Alison, like I know you're planning it out too, but are you also sort of when you're downtime thinking about scenes and working things through in your head, or are you just pretty much focus only when you write?
Yes and no. So a lot of times at the end of one of my writing sessions, I'll be happy to leave it behind in my office and go about my day. But sometimes characters stick with you and they will follow you around your house. And when you're cooking dinner for your kids or putting them to bed, or and they keep on talking to you. So sometimes that happens too. But usually I'm pretty good at leaving it behind. Doing my time and then going about my day.
And so I guess, when we were talking about this before we recorded, and you were mentioning the book a week, I was in my head thinking, okay, so you're writing 52 books a year. But I guess because of the planning involved, it's not like, okay, you finish one and then the next week you start the next one, and the next week you start the next one, right? So you're obviously still having to spend that time doing the planning for all the books to be able to keep up that pace. Do you try now to write all of your projects that quickly, and have you sped up the process of the planning process from the 4 to 6 months that on your original one, or how is that working?
Well, originally I did plan on just going for a full year and doing 52 books. I did do all the planning in advance. So I spent 4 to 6 months in advance doing all the planning, because I was planning on doing this just for a straight 365 days. I did get derailed around the holidays. Again, those pesky kids, there's a lot of stuff going on around the holidays. So I didn't finish my full year. I am planning on writing the books that I didn't get to. But after I did 34 books in a row, that was 34 weeks in a row. I did take a break. And now I'm editing the ones that I have already written.
Okay, so sorry, maybe I misunderstood then. So when you talked about the 4 to 6 weeks of planning, that wasn't planning one book, that was planning 52 books.
Yeah, 4 to 6 months. Yeah, I was planning all the books for this project. Yeah, so I still have, I can do the math, 18 books.
Somebody who's not even sure what to cook.
Yes.
As somebody who's not sure what even to cook for dinner tonight, I like the idea of you planning out a year's worth of books is amazing, mind-boggling.
Oh, thanks. It was fun. I love, again, stories are all around. And I always found, and I don't know if you guys find this, but I always have more ideas than I had time to write. So for me to do this, it was partly to get all my ideas out. And since I write short stories, I've had a number of readers say, wow, what happens next in the short story? Are you ever going to write this into a book? And I was like, oh, well, I don't really have the time now, So some of my book ideas actually stemmed from previous work that I had written. So it was fun to finally tell the complete story of the characters.
So, okay, so when you plan during that period of planning, and you're planning out 52 books, were you sort of all over the place, like, one, or were you kind of like one every few days, you plan one book and then move to the next, or you're like, okay, today I have this character, well, I'll put her over here, and this scene will actually work better in this book over here, and how did that process go? Because even the planning of 52 books to me sounds like a daunting task to do all at once, because in my mind a lot of things would get muddled up, especially if I was doing them, I guess, concurrently as opposed to consecutively.
Yeah, well, my goal was, and I've had this goal ever since I was a little kid writing, was most authors usually pick a genre, stick with it. It's a genre they love to read. It's a genre they love to write. So my goal, because I always loved reading all different genres, I didn't see a lot of authors writing in multiple genres back then. And so one of my goals of this project was to live my childhood dream and write in pretty much every genre I could think of. So I actually started with genres. So I made a list of all the genres that I wanted to write, including ones that I had never written before, like Westerns. I hadn't written Westerns really. And so I started with the genres, and then I had to come up with an idea for each of that would fit each of those genres, which some were definitely harder than others.
And I guess you have.
I was just going to say, what would you say is the hardest genre?
That's a good question.
Conversely, you could say what the easiest one is, but I find that that's interesting. Romance, for example, has very specific beats and a formula, and so you kind of always know what it is you're meant to be delivering. Whereas science fantasy is a completely different kettle of fish, and you could go in so many different ways. Yeah, I would love to know which you thought were the easiest and more difficult genres to write in.
Well, for me, some of the genres that I do love a lot, and some of my published books are Fantasy and romance. I found, those were my, like when I was tired from writing the genre from the week before, then I'd be like, okay, I'm going to pull a romance out of my back pocket and write for this week and take a little bit of a break because, I've written a lot of romance or fantasy. So some of the harder ones is not because I wasn't familiar with the genre. I think the harder ones were the historical ones, maybe, because those require a lot of research and I like to be accurate when it comes to history. You want to be accurate. You don't want a reader later on saying, "Well, you got the timeline wrong on this. Really, these ships didn't come to Greenland until this date." So I found it hard to sort of let that go because I did a lot of research and planning ahead of time, but at the same time, there were some facts that came up when I was writing that I was like, "Well, I don't know this." And I don't have time to research it because I won't hit my word count. So I'm just going to put a note, like, I'll write how I think it did, how I think it went, and then I'll put a note in it saying, fix this later. So that was hard for me to let go. I don't know if you guys are sort of perfectionist writers and you have to get the facts right right then when you're writing, or if you're like, whatever, it'll come out in editing.
Yeah, I'm more of the needs to get it all right the first time, but that's not a good thing necessarily. Like I would rather be somebody that could put the note in and say fix that later, because it interrupts the flow. Even if I'm not writing a book in a week, it's still, I can get hung up on the details and then spend far too much time mucking around trying to get things perfect, where I should just let them go. As we've talked about before, that first draft, telling yourself the story and, just getting it all out there and then fixing it all up in the editing, which is always something that a goal that I've struggled to attain a little bit better. But, it is something that that I think a lot of authors sort of have that. They're on the spectrum of how much of each they do. For me, it's definitely a little bit too much on the perfectionism side, but I am working on fixing that. I guess, like, if you're going to write something like a Western that you've never written before, I assume you'd read a bunch, though. Like, you're writing in genres that you've read a lot of. You said you read all sorts of genres, but, to really understand how the stories, every genre is sort of put together a little differently. They all have their different tropes and their different, common things that readers come to expect from that. Not to say that you can't be different, but I think when you're have a goal like this, you're trying to write something to genre probably close as possible. So I imagine you read a lot of those types of books before for each of the genres you chose, right?
I have. And one thing actually I did try to do is, because I knew a number of the tropes, I try to turn them on their head as much as possible, which is one thing that I love to do with my fiction. So, for example, speaking of Western, so instead of just doing a classic Western, with cowboys and stuff, I did a ninja Western. So it was set in the Wild West, but I sort of changed history so that it was a town run by Japanese samurai. So I combined several genres at the same time. So that made it fun for me.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Definitely would keep things interesting. So when you released all of these, were all of the ones in this project that, the 34 or whatever that you did, were these all self-published then?
They haven't been published yet.
Okay.
I'm still working on that. I'm in the editing stage now because I don't know about you guys, but for me, my first draft is not a publishable draft usually.
Absolutely.
So,
what is it? Who said it? The first draft is the author telling himself the story or herself the story.
That's what I'm saying. That's always been my goal, but I never really sort of achieved that.
Yeah, no, that's completely true. I agree with that.
Okay, so that's a good point. So that week of writing was just to get that first draft, and then you moved on to the next one. You didn't stop and start editing that one after the week. You just moved on to the next.
Yep.
That makes sense. So you're doing your edits, and then I assume you're sending them off to another editor, or when they're done, or?
If there's one that I feel is needs more eyes on it, I do. Some I don't. So for example, one way that I got my last book published, it's the one that's right behind me on the screen, was I entered it in a contest and won the contest. And part of the winnings was to publish my book and do a marketing launch of it. So I love literary contests. So I'm already starting to send out some of these books to various literary contests. And so far, I'm not allowed to talk about one, but one actually has advanced in the contest. So fingers crossed. We'll see.
That's awesome.
Oh,
Yeah.
good for you. Wonderful.
Mhm.
Oh, thanks.
So the editing process, do you do that sequentially? You know, you take one and then start editing it and then move on to the next one, or are you sort of editing them all sort of the whim of the day? I feel like editing romance today.
Well, first of all, so I'm very methodical about it because this is, being an editor and writer is my full-time job. So I look for the submission opportunities or the publishers that are looking for specific calls, and that's the book that I'll tackle because I know I'll eventually get around to all of them, but it's a big backlog right now. So I, in the interest of getting these published and out there as soon as they possibly can be, I'll target my submissions. It's sort of what I do with short stories, poems, that I write also.
Well, that makes sense. I know we had somebody recently on talking about contests and the idea that often those contests are looking for specific genres, specific ideas, specific topics. So if you have books that fit within those, and those contests have deadlines, so you want to make sure that you can get them in to hit that. So that makes a lot of sense in terms of that workflow. What was do you know what your total word count was out of all those books? I imagine it was over 1 million.
It was over 1 million. I'm not 100% sure. I did, when I was doing this project, I posted on my website every week my word count for each individual project. So I could probably go back and look up all of those and add them up, but I just haven't done that yet.
Okay, so what's the process for somebody who wants to do something like this? Whether it's writing in a week or whether it's just speeding up their process of writing. What is your step-by-step kind of tips for them?
Sure, definitely. So the thing, when I first started writing and saying, okay, I'm going to start writing professionally, I'm going to start sending my work out, I want to get my books published, over a decade ago, I was a pantser. So basically I just sat down and wrote when inspiration struck, and that didn't always happen. And sometimes I'd write myself in a corner and then have to figure my way out. So a lot of the time that I spent with the whole process was trying to navigate my way to the ending of the book. So since I started doing it professionally and had to turn in, chapter by chapter outlines to clients and hit deadlines, I've found that streamlining the process and being prepared ahead of time has really helped, because I know some writers say, oh, I can't outline because it will interfere with the creative process. But, the outline is just sort of a map. You can always, like when you're taking a road trip, and I love road trips. I love throwing the kids in the car and heading off and finding an adventure. A map is just there to show you what's possible. So you don't necessarily have to stick with it, even if you make a plan. You can always, again, sometimes the characters run away from you and you want to follow where they lead, but at least you have a structure behind it so that you can sit down and write every day. And so having that outline gives you more freedom to explore, finishing the book, actually getting to the end. And that is sometimes a huge impediment to new writers. So I would really recommend, like maybe if you haven't done it before, maybe if you're halfway through your book, writing your book, and you're sort of in the saggy middle and you don't know where to go from there, sit down, write an outline of what you've already done so far, and then, just have some ideas out there. Like maybe, Sarah Jane in this chapter, maybe she could go into this cave, maybe, and then what would happen? Maybe she could, instead go to this house, this creepy old house, then what would happen? So just write down some outline ideas and see if that helps with getting you to the next page.
Okay, so outlining, that's step one. What's the next step?
Yeah, the next step, I like to do character sketches because, again, I like to really know my characters in and out. So I have a template, and you can find lots of templates online. There's a lot of them available, everything from, physical description of a character to what their motivation is. And that's very helpful so that if you encounter something new, or the character encounters something new, you know how they're going to react. And that's very important, especially if you want to skip some of the editing steps later on, like, oh man, my character, if she saw a bear, she wouldn't run screaming into the woods. She'd be like, oh, hey, I love bears. I'd go up and hug a bear. Don't hug a bear, just say. Yeah, so you want to have that. So you want to have that so that there's, for me, that helps streamline the process of editing later. So at least I know my characters hopefully are acting the same way throughout the whole book. And then, yeah, the last step is just to sit down and write, I guess. Once you have all the preparation done.
Yeah, I think if you're writing multiple projects too, it really helps to have those character sketches, because you're going to inevitably sort of mix these characters up in your mind. Even little things like their physical descriptions, you don't want their hair color changing from chapter to chapter. And but as you said, if they're a type A personality, you don't want them acting like a type B in half the scenes, right? So you want to make sure that you have that and refer to those notes, especially when you're writing quickly. Yeah, and like you said, it will help with the editing process. You don't have to fix those things later on. So yeah, definitely. So, did you ever, before you did all this, were you a participant in NaNoWriMo? Is that how you started off? Like, I'm a month, that's too much time.
Yes, I have definitely done NaNoWriMo with several of my books early on. I found it fun just to go out, like writing is so solitary. Like you're in your, even if you have a wonderful space away from home to write in, you're by yourself and, the characters are in your head. So I loved NaNoWriMo for that very reason. You go out, connect with other writers. And well, it's, it's finished now. This, they announced this year that they're not going to continue it. They're definitely from NaNoWriMo. There have been a lot of subgroups, different groups that have sprung up. One that I really love, and I actually run one of the writing groups, is called Shut Up and Write, where you basically just get either in person, or there's a number of online groups. I run one of the online groups. You just get together with your fellow writers, say, okay, for the next hour, I'm going to write, I'm going to work on the next chapter of my book or something. And then you do. And then at the end, you check in and say, hey, I got, 500 words, or I got, 200 words, or, I got distracted and emailed my friend or something. So but at least you have some accountability. So I love that, I think really sprung out from, NaNoWriMo and all these writers connecting.
Yeah, I when they announced that they were stopping NaNoWriMo, right after that, I had sent an email to my author list, in my regular newsletter, and I mentioned that, and that was what I was saying to them is, just because that ended officially doesn't mean that you can't still set goals for yourself to write faster, or to whatever the goal is, writing in a week or a month or 6 months. You don't need an official organization behind you. Maybe it helps to have that sort of support, but there's tons of support groups for writers out there on the internet. And it doesn't surprise me that now that that one is gone, a whole bunch are trying to sort of take its place officially. But you don't really need those to write this way.
Yeah, it can be helpful though, especially if you're a new writer, which is why it's great to reach out and connect with other writers, because it's not just about accountability, but it's about cheerleading, because like in this profession, there's so much rejection, right? And whether it's, if you're traditionally published or you're writing short stories and sending them out to magazines, you're going to get rejections. It's just a fact, right? Or like, if you self-publish and you get that bad review, it's a fact, it's going to happen, and you have to be able to bounce back from that and believe in your own writing and continue.
Well, you can get bad reviews even if you don't self-publish. So
No, that's true.
I've read some really, really bad traditionally published books.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. So what's next? When you finish the editing phase of all these books, I know you still have 18 left to go. Is this a project that you would try to repeat, or are you just gonna like finish those 18 off and then just do it at a normal pace, which is probably for you still a very fast pace, but or are you planning on trying 52 again?
Well, yes and no. So I do have some publishers interested in some of these books, some small press publishers. Support indie press, please. All those listeners out there. So I do plan on sending some of my books out to them, and some that are passion projects for me, I might self-publish. But I actually just applied to a fellowship, and applied to some other opportunities. And if any of those fall into my lap, my plan is to start afresh, because I did not hit my goal. I did not hit my goal of doing 52 books in a year. And I already know after writing 34 that I can do this. I just have to make extra plans around the holidays, prepare for that time, because I know it derailed me the first time. And so then I'm currently actually right now generating more ideas for this future project. So hopefully when I'm done generating all those ideas, maybe I can start afresh and start 52 books again. We'll see.
So you'll keep those 18. You'll start off with those 18 and then add another 34 to it, right? Yeah.
That is the plan, yeah.
Sorry, Roland, what were you saying?
Oh no, I just think that's amazing. What a goal to have. And then think of how many of us will die with stories still inside us, and there you get to like put it out. And people always ask me, where do you come up with the ideas for your books? And I used to find when I was writing on a regular basis, the ideas would just come. It's like the more you wrote, the more ideas you ended up having.
Definitely. And especially, readers love series too. So especially if you write one person's story and you're like, oh, but wait, I really like this other character too, and I really want to write it. Well, with a project like mine, I can. So some of the books that I actually wrote for the 34 are series, like, trilogies. So I got to explore various characters, and I might actually just pick up some of those stories and continue, with another character from that world. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Did you write those back to back, or did you stagger those throughout the process, the series?
I did write those back to back because I get really deep into the world that I'm building, and especially with a week, if there's not a lot of time to get really deep into it. So I found it really easy to just write those back to back, because I was already in that world and I already had it in my head. And my kids could tell you I'd be wandering around being like, oh yes, okay, and like the Scorpion King, he's got to appear in book 2, and like, so yeah. It was fun to just stay in that world. But then, one reason why I like to write a lot of different genres is I like to switch things up. So I think I would, if I had just chosen one genre for this whole project, I think I'd get very, very bored. I'd be like, oh no, not magic again. I can't write another fantasy book. I don't care how much I love them. So it was fun to switch genres, to be like, okay, last week I was, writing a cozy mystery and murdering reporters. This week I'm going to write a love story and have reporters fall in love. So
I think that would help keep things fresh too. I think if you were writing 52 fantasy novels, there would probably inevitably be a lot of overlap, just because, you know, you're thinking so much about each book, and then to switch to another book that is the same genre, it feels to me like it would be hard to make each book so different, because your head space is, you know, but moving to a totally different genre, I think it would be a much easier mental switch to shift from, you know, fantasy to a mystery, or to a, you know, a Western, ninja Western.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I think one thing that is hard as a writer, so when you get into that character, when you get into that voice, especially, and that tone of a certain genre, if you then jump to a similar genre, then it's hard not to use that same tone and language. So again, yeah, it kept things fresh. It helped me not have all the characters sounding alike, you know, in different genres.
Yeah, and I imagine that that's why it would help to write those fantasy books or whatever it was back to back, is you could keep, you do want, for that same reason, you do want to keep the same tone, and you don't have the time to go back and reread book one to get all those details straight again. So if you jump right into book two, it's still fresh in your mind.
Yeah, that's true.
I was going to ask a question. Gore Vidal once said that every writer has like a troupe of actors in their heads. They're like, he said, good writers have 10, exceptional writers have 20, and they're like fully formed characters in your head. And every book that you write, every story that you write, they act out the roles. It's like, and I've found that in my own life. I like have these characters who are very clearly like the same character, the same actors playing different characters as I write my different books. And I was just wondering if that's something that you experience as well. It's almost like in the old 50s movies, how, you know, you'd have John Wayne would be a character this week, and in the next movie he'd be this character, and he basically always played himself. And so do you find you have a cast of actors in your head, or do you really come up with like new people every time?
There are some characters that I love. So I love, for example, one of the romance genres that I love to write is rom-com, because I like that sort of quirky, funny female character that, you know, might be a bit of a nerd. It might be, you know, sort of clueless, but she's fun, right? So I'm sure she repeats in a lot of my books. You might find her in, you know, a mystery. You might find her. And I've actually had friends of mine, you know, part of my writers group say, yeah, this is just you. So, you know, we all bring parts of ourselves and parts of people we know into our books, even though we're not supposed to say that because they'd get mad. But yeah, and some characters are more deliberate, you know, like when I'm writing YA, for example, I go to my daughters and I'm like, okay, look, I'm not a teenager girl anymore. I need your help. So they will help me out with those characters, because again, kids these days, they're speaking a foreign language as far as I'm concerned. So I will go sometimes directly to the source to create hopefully fresh and new characters that feel authentic.
So tell me about all your friends, and then you say that to your daughters, and then they become characters in your books.
Yeah, well, some of them are deliberate. Like I like to, so I belong to this belonged to this writer group for, again, over a decade. You know, we actually, one thing that we like to do is we like to do Easter eggs in each other's books. So, and this is all with permission, nothing is stolen. So sometimes I'll be like, you know, when we're critiquing each other's work, I'll be like, I really like this character in your book. Can I have him do a cameo in my book? And they'll say yes. So, or, you know, one of the writers in my group, he's a very well-published author. He has way more publications than I do. I think he has like something like 500 or 600 short stories and poems, and over 10 books now, 12, 13 something. And so he likes to actually put us into his books, so and his short stories. So there are in some of his fiction, you will find characters named Alison McBain wandering around sometimes, or other people from our group. And of course, that's just for us. But if anyone knew us, they would be like, okay, I recognize, you know, this other character, Peter or Sarah, or, you know, anyone from our group, because they do reappear.
I love that though, and it's a really rewarding thing for a reader to stumble across other characters, especially from like another writer's books.
Yes, it's fun.
Yeah, well, I wonder. I mean, I think it would be really hard to create brand new characters for every one of the books, and in our lives, there's a lot of people that are similar. Maybe there's a few different little quirks here and there, but there are. I mean, tropes became tropes probably for a reason. There are, those typical alpha males and demure females and strong females, and like so. But you still got to mix it up a bit. So I guess that becomes one of the. I think I would almost find that harder to come up with fresh characters for 52 books or even 34 books than I would coming up with the plot in general, to try to keep it fresh. Right? I feel like the storyline would be easier than coming up with the characters, but that's just me. What's your plan? Like, okay, so after it's all edited, I know you want to enter them into contests and stuff, but let's look at the ideal sort of publication schedule for you. A lot of authors, well, traditionally published authors is often like a book every year or two, right? But with self-published authors, you often see them publishing multiple books a year, but usually it's not 52, right? And since you're going through an editing process, and even if you weren't entering the contest, you finish one, and once it's all polished up, you don't have to wait until all 34 are done before you start publishing, right? You could just start on that, right? Get it cover done, et cetera, et cetera. So, but even if you were to do, say, 4 a year, you've got the next 8 years covered. So what's your ideal sort of publication schedule? Like, how many would you want to release every year? Because it seems like if you spend time with marketing and promotion of each book, it's going to take time. Like, you probably don't want to release them all at once. You want to build a following, you want to get readers interested, and also, aside from that, are you publishing them all under the same pen name, or are you trying to put them under different pen names to sort of grow different reader lists and fan bases? Because it might be harder to, often people, I mean, I know you read in multiple genres, but a lot of people sort of stick to one or two main genres that they like, and so often if they have if even though they're a writer they love writes romance and they read romance, they might not read their science fiction, they might not read their westerns, because that's not a genre that they're into. And so if you have a list of readers for each genre, you can sort of keep that separate and sort of tell them about the books that would be of interest to them. So I'm just wondering about your strategy around all of
that. Well, yes, I know the conventional wisdom is to have different pen names for different genres, but I think this is another place where I'm going to buck the trend. And who knows if it will work well. So far, it's worked okay for the stuff that I've had published, because again, I publish in all genres. And I am definitely planning on having them all under my own name. As to publication schedule, that depends. Again, some of them will hopefully come out with traditional publishers. Some of them I'm going to publish on my own. It will depend on how much I can handle at any one point, and especially if I'm going to be doing the 52 books again, I'm probably going to be concentrating more on writing more first rather than publishing. But yeah, it's a juggling act, especially if you're your own one-woman team or one-man team of doing your own promotions, doing events. I love to go out to events, do readings, going on podcasts, of course. So there's a lot of background stuff that is more than just the writing. Yeah, and especially with self-publishing, you're a one-person team in a lot of ways. I do have a wonderful publicist who helps out. Can I give him a shout out? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, you're from Mickey, right?
Yep, Mickey Mickelson from Creative Edge. So anyone who I would definitely recommend for authors who are at that stage of their career, who might have a few publications and might need help with the marketing side of things, publicists can definitely be helpful in filling in that gap, because writers should write. And all this other marketing stuff, I know both of you have backgrounds in marketing. It doesn't come naturally to most writers. It really, really doesn't. So you don't have to be a jack of all trades. You can hand off some of these roles.
Absolutely. Yeah. We had Mickey on the podcast back in 2022. He was on episode 29, if anyone's interested in checking him out. But yeah, he came on and told us a lot about what he does. And every once in a while, he'll send me an author that he thinks would be good for the show. And I mean, it's a great relationship from that side of it too, right? He's helping out the authors. He's helping out the people that need the authors to come on and help them. So yeah, a publicist is definitely even self-publishers is something that self-publishers should look at. I know a lot of authors think that that's something that only traditionally published authors need, but self-publishers can definitely find value in a publicist as well.
100%. Yeah, you don't have to do it all yourself. I mean, it seems like you do when you first look at self-publishing, but no, there's tons of people. Like, you can hire an editor, you can hire a book cover designer, you can hire someone who can lay out your book for you. There are a lot of wonderful experts out there who this is their bread and butter, and they can definitely help you produce a wonderful product.
Well, we are approaching the top of the hour because it's a psychiatrist hour, but I think that's really good advice to kind of wrap things up with. So, yeah, and isn't it nice to give Mickey a shout out because he put us in contact. So, Craig, before we wrap things up and Alison tells everyone where they can find out all about her books and things like that, do you have any final questions?
Not really. I mean, I think that this has been really valuable. I think it gives an idea for authors about, what's possible out there. And even if they can't write a book in a week, through the planning and figuring out, setting goals, you can definitely speed up your process a bit. And they shouldn't be afraid to write that first draft and know that it's going to be edited later. That helps the process along as well. But yeah, it's really great to hear, your tips and the way that you went about it. And I think it's really an interesting goal. I've never really heard about anyone trying to do something like that. So it's great that you were able to come on and talk to us about it. So thank you for that.
Oh, thanks so much.
So, Alison, where can people find out more about you and more about your incredible plethora of books?
Well, if you just want to look at me as an author, I have an author website. It's AlisonMcBain.com. That's Alison with one L. If you want to know more about my project, including I have a YouTube channel where I detailed all the books, read excerpts from the books that I wrote, and had writing tips that I published every week. That is at authorversusai.com.
That is wonderful. Well, we will pop a link to that down below. So if you have enjoyed listening to Alison or watching her on YouTube, be sure to scroll down there, give this episode a like, and click on the link to check out her stuff. And while you're there, there's that big empty comment section. So be sure to leave Alison a comment and let her know how much you've appreciated everything she has shared with us today. I mean, writing a book a week, that is an incredible thing to keep up. So thank you so much for joining us, Alison. We really appreciated it. And friends listening, well, we'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Fully Booked. So until then, stay tuned.